Okay, I'm privileged and humbled to be here every time I get to speak to a group on our Constitution, on American history. I ask myself, why me? But it is really good to be here tonight, and I appreciate Ronnie having asked me to join you tonight. I got a lot to say in 30 minutes, so I'm gonna hit the ground running. So strap your seatbelts on. We're going to put a lot of quotes up on the screen here, so read as you can. I'm going to try to read these quickly as we go through this. I'd like the founders to speak for themselves, is really what I'd like to do. So we're going to go through a lot of quotes. I want to start with two questions. Two questions, and this is the interactive part, so I'd love you to answer these questions. The first question is, what rights are granted to us in the First and Second Amendments of the Constitution?
None. They come from God.
Wow. You don't need me. You don't need me. It's amazing. Honestly, that's the first time anybody's answered the question correctly. The answer to the question is none. And what's the key word in that question? The word granted. We're not granted anything in the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution is our compact with the federal government. It's where we delegate power to them. So our rights are not granted to us. The answer to the second question, if the Second Amendment were repealed today, so today, if Congress and the states ratified a repeal of the Second Amendment, what would change constitutionally? Not politically, constitutionally.
Nothing.
Nothing. The answer to the question is nothing. And so you know that I'm not taking your answers out. Those are the answers I had on the board. Okay, we're going to go through that and discuss why that's true tonight. Now, first of all, I'd like to define a couple of terms. We hear a lot of discussion about the political spectrum, and terms are used and definitions are never given, and I'd like to just real quickly talk about the political spectrum. First of all, most of us know what the left, what the liberals and progressives are. Remember, a rose by any other name is still a rose. The left by any other name is still the left, okay? We know what the right and conservatives are. Hopefully that's who we are here tonight. We rarely hear mentioned the far left, but when we do, we also often hear the communists and the socialists lumped into that category. The far right are any of us that are openly Christian or are gun nuts. Okay? And we hear about these people all the time. Now what confuses me is oftentimes the Nazis and the fascists are thrown into that category. And I don't know how they're any different from the communists and socialists is the problem. Okay? And then there's the last category, which are the smartest people on the planet. They're the moderates or centrists, right? Okay? But I cannot figure out who these people are. You know, there's usually only two positions on an issue. You're either for higher taxes or you're not. You're either for traditional marriage or you're not. You're either for freedom or you're not. I don't know what a moderate or centrist position is. So I've had a very difficult time understanding who these people are. So let me graph this out for you. Let's put this political spectrum on a graph here. So at the bottom we have the government. On the left, far left, is 100% government. On the far right is no government. And then the scale, the vertical scale, is freedom. We start at the right with no government. How much freedom do we actually have? Now this is just relative. Pick any number here. We're not totally free is the point here. We're not totally free because if there's no government, you spend all your time protecting yourself, your family, and your stuff. So you don't have freedom to go on trips to the mountains or whatever because you can't let your stuff be left alone. You've got to protect you and yourself and your family. So as we add government, though, as we move to the left and add government, what happens to our freedom? It increases up to a point. And then there's a point at which as you add more government, you lose freedom. And you lose freedom. And where we want to be is at the top of that pinnacle, the top of that graph there, what I've called here the pinnacle of freedom. That, I believe, is what our founders created for us in the Constitution. That's what they were trying to create, is a republic where we had just enough government to have the greatest amount of freedom and to protect us, to protect our stuff, to protect our rights, as we'll see in just a minute. But what's happened over time is we've moved to the left, and we continue to move to the left every year and every year. And when we talk about the moderates are just not quite as far to the left as the left is. But they're still farther to the left than we are, and then we don't want to be there. I don't think these people are the smart people. The smart people are the people that want to climb that mountain and stand on the pinnacle of freedom, and that's where I want to be. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So remember, what does the left want to do? They want to control everything you have and everything you do. It's all about power. If you're familiar with Dr. Tim Daughtry, Dr. Gary Castle, and this is out of their book, this is what they say. And that's true. That's what the left wants to do. They want to control everything you have and everything you do. What's Obamacare about? It's about controlling health care. It's controlling everything you have and everything you do. Gun control is not about guns. It's about control. Controlling everything you have and everything you do. And if you remember that, if you remember the political spectrum here, the farther to the left you go, the more control there is and the less freedom there is. And if we move back to that pinnacle of freedom, is more and more freedom. And that's where we want to be. The most important words in our documents, our founding documents, are out of the Declaration of Independence. I want to quickly review these. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, first of all, if our founders tried to apply for tenure at a college, they would not be able to get tenure because they actually believed in truth. And it's sad to say that we have forgotten what truth is, and we don't believe in right and wrong anymore. And so many of our people in our country don't. There is no black and white, there's no right and wrong. But there is truth, and our founders believed that there was truth. And they believed it was self-evident. They list 4 truths in the Declaration of Independence they say are self-evident. In other words, to be self-evident, we don't have to discuss it, we don't have to argue about it, we don't have to debate it. It's self-evident. Everybody with a brain understands that these principles are true, and they are self-evident. And what are those principles? Number 1, all men are created equal. And the operative word there is created. We didn't just come out of nothing. We were created. God, our Heavenly Father, created us and created all of us of equal value and equal worth. Every single one of us have worth in the eyes of God, and not one of us does not. So that's the first truth. The second one, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And who is it that gives us our rights? This goes back to the first question. Our rights are not granted to us by government, by the First and Second Amendment. They are given to us by God. And that is so, so important to grasp, that our rights come to us by God. And unalienable, by the way, unalienable. The word alien is something that is foreign to us, something that doesn't belong to us. And to say something is unalienable means it is part of us. It is not foreign to us. It is who we are. It is inherent in our being. The fact that we are created beings, we have these rights that God has given to us. Number 3, the purpose of government. And anybody who's an elected official, and our congressman who's here tonight especially, needs to understand the purpose of government is to secure our rights. That to secure these rights that God has given to us, governments are instituted among men. That is the purpose of government, and that's what government needs to be about. Yesterday I was sitting in a restaurant where we had the Senate hearings going on gun control. And I sat there and listened to Lindsey Graham debating on how many bullets were too many. Okay? And I can't understand that. The purpose of Lindsey Graham, of any of those officials in Washington being in office, is to protect those rights, to keep us at that pinnacle of freedom. But instead, it's about control. He is moving us farther to the left by talking about how many bullets are too many. And the fourth, self-evident truth, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. What is the greatest threat to the left? And I think it's the freedom. It's those words, those first 2 truths. All men are created equal. They're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. And I'd say in one word, the greatest threat to the left is God. And why is that? The left is all about power and control. Remember, to the left, government is God. Government is our salvation. Government's our provider. Government's our protector. And if there's something greater than government, then that's the threat to the left. And that thing that is greater than government is God. To put it in the words of John Dickinson, you might remember John Dickinson. He was one of those at the the Continental Congress that debated the Declaration of Independence. But he was opposed to it. He was opposed to separating from Great Britain, and the day that the vote was taken, he was not there. But he later was involved as delegate, I think it was from Delaware, at the Constitutional Convention, and he was one of the signers of the Constitution. He said this: "An inalienable right is a right which God gave to you, and which no," and I love the word, "no inferior power has a right to take away." Our government, no government in this world, is superior. Everyone is inferior to the God, the Creator, that gave to you and me our rights. Thomas Jefferson put it this way: "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure if we remove their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that their liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with His wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that His justice cannot sleep forever." If our politicians, if our elected officials just understand that when they violate our rights, when they work to take away our rights, they are just stirring up the wrath of God. If they would just grasp that and respect our rights. I don't know if you remember several years ago when Elena Kagan was in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Tom Coburn was talking to her about the Second Amendment, trying to get her understand from her what her position on the Second Amendment was. And he finally got frustrated with her, and he just asked her, "What's your belief on unalienable rights? What do you think the Declaration of Independence says about unalienable rights?" And her answer was very telling. In fact, her answer disqualified her, in my opinion, from being a justice on the Supreme Court. She said, "You should not want me to act in any way on the basis of such a belief on unalienable rights. I think you should want me to act on the basis of law." In other words, what she believes is that government, the Constitution, gives to us our rights. She does not believe those rights belong to us. And at any point in time, in her opinion, the government can take away those rights from us. And that statement, at that point, every single member of the Senate should have said, "Thank you, Ms. Kagan, for being here with us today, and we're finished with you. Mr. President, who's your next candidate?" Every single one of them should have said that. And every single one of them that voted for Elena Kagan needs to be removed from office. We need to make that happen. And just as a note, the Supreme Court has cited the Declaration of Independence on over 215 occasions to argue a particular interpretation of the Constitution. So the Declaration of Independence is a document that the Supreme Court refers to. So it has a basis in it's not just our founding document, it is who we are. It's our philosophy of government. It's that you cannot understand, in my opinion, the Constitution without understanding the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration, there are 27 reasons listed for why we separated from Great Britain. The Constitution addresses every one of those. And I'd love to spend 3 hours here tonight and go through all those, but it addresses every one of those. If you don't understand the Declaration of Independence, you can't understand what the founders are trying to do when they wrote the Constitution. And I asked this question already: what rights are granted to us in the First and Second Amendments? None, of course. Our rights are granted to us, or given to us by God. The Ninth Amendment was written to protect that very thing. The enumeration of the Constitution, or the listing in the Constitution of certain rights, shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. In other words, just because the Constitution doesn't list a right doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So the point here being that the Constitution protects what is already ours. It doesn't grant to us anything. The purpose of a Constitution, and remember, this is something I always try to drill home to people. The purpose of a Constitution is, first of all, to create a government. Secondly, to define and limit its powers. The Constitution is not a document of unlimited powers. The General Welfare Clause is not a clause of unlimited power. As Madison, I think it was, said that the General Welfare Clause needs to be understood in light of the specific. So the Constitution is not one of unlimited powers. The Constitution, a Constitution, defines the powers of our government and its limits. And the 10th Amendment underscores that. The powers not delegated or not given to the United States by we the people, by the Constitution, are prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states and respectively, or to the people. So in other words, the power we have not given to the federal government belongs to us or to our state, the state of North Carolina. It does not belong to the federal government. Anytime the federal government steps beyond those limited enumerated powers, it is grabbing power, and that is called tyranny. Anytime that happens. What was the number one argument against ratification of the Constitution? Anybody know the number one argument against ratification of the Constitution?
Fear it get too big.
Fear we get too big? Actually, I think there was one other. We could argue.
Give the government too much power.
There was no Bill of Rights. And it ties into that very thing. There's no Bill of Rights. There was no definition of what our rights were in the Constitution. Now, what was the number one argument against the Bill of Rights?
It wasn't needed a Bill of Rights, you can take them away.
That's a true statement. The argument against was it wasn't necessary. But as actually the letter from Danbury, Connecticut, Thomas Jefferson dealt with that very thing. If it's listed in the Constitution, it suggests that you can take it away. But the number one argument against the Bill of Rights was it's not necessary. Because nowhere in the Constitution does the federal government have any power to take away our right to free speech, our right to freedom of religion, our right to bear arms. So the point here that I want you to grasp is the second question that I asked. If the Second Amendment were repealed today, what would change constitutionally? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nowhere in the Constitution is the federal government given any power to take our guns, to take our ammunition, to limit the size of our magazines. That power does not exist in the federal government. Every single person on that Senate committee yesterday should have just stood up and said, "This is not our role. This is not the purpose of the federal government. They have no power to do what they're doing. And if they pass any bill, it is tyranny." James Wilson was one of 6 people that signed both the Declaration and the Constitution. He was also one of the original Supreme Court justices. And he said this: our documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, were to acquire a new security for the possession or the recovery of those rights to which we were previously entitled. In other words, our rights were previously given to us by God. And our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, was to secure the possession of those rights, to secure our rights, as the Declaration of Independence says. Which we were previously entitled by the immediate gift or by the unerring law of an all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. Every government which has not this in view as its principal object is not a government of the legitimate kind. In other words, if a government doesn't view its role, its number one purpose is securing the rights of the people, then it is an illegitimate government. Now remember, this is James Wilson, signer of the Declaration, signer of the Constitution, and one of the first Supreme Court justices, nominated by George Washington. Adams says, rights are antecedent to all earthly government. Rights cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws. Rights are derived from the great legislator of the universe. Again, a reference to God giving us our rights. Thomas Jefferson, government is to declare and enforce only our natural rights and duties and to take none of them from us. How did the founders view the Second Amendment? So I've talked really generically about rights, but let's look at what the founders had to say about the Second Amendment specifically. Now this is back to James Wilson again. James Wilson said, now I love the word he uses here, homicide, one person killing another. Homicide is enjoined or required when it is necessary for the defense of one's person or house. It is the great natural law of self-preservation which, as we have seen, cannot be repealed or superseded or suspended by any human institution. So our right to self-preservation cannot be superseded by anyone, by any human institution, in other words, by government. This law, however, is expressly recognized in the Constitution of Pennsylvania. The right of the citizens to bear arms in the defense of themselves shall not be questioned. Now, the wording of that should sound very similar to our Second Amendment. You'll find with many of the state constitutions of the 13 colonies, the wording of a lot of the things in those constitutions is very similar to our Constitution. So if you look to the Pennsylvania Constitution, you can see very clearly here it referenced the right of us, the people, to bear arms. It had nothing to do with a militia or an organized army of any sort. It was a right of the people to keep and bear arms. That was the view of our founders. Going on, George Tucker. Now, George Tucker, if you know, familiar with William Blackstone, he wrote commentaries on British English law. I forget the title of the book, but he was one of those scholars, one of those people that that our founders used for almost well, through their lives and well up into the 20th century. Blackstone's commentaries on law was the legal reference for a long period of time. George Tucker wrote an annotated version of Blackstone's commentaries where he footnoted and put in all sorts of references and things throughout his commentaries. And he lived during the time of our founders, and he said this: "The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest limits possible." Now think here, how many bullets are too many? Okay? Defining the limits, the narrowest limits possible. Wherever the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. Now, isn't that true? Our senators talking about limiting our rights is exactly what James Wilson is talking. I'm sorry, George Tucker is talking about here. It's exactly what he's talking about here. George Tucker continues, "In the Second Amendment, it is declared that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This prohibition is general. No clause in the Constitution could, by any rule of construction, be conceived to give the Congress a power to disarm the people." And this goes to the heart of that second question I asked. If you take away the Second Amendment, if you repeal it, it doesn't change anything. Because there is nothing, what he says here, no clause in the Constitution could be conceived to give the Congress a power to disarm the people. James Madison, "The advantage of being armed is an advantage which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation. In the several kingdoms of Europe, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms." That is exactly what's going on in Washington. They are afraid to trust us with our arms. They call us nutcases, and they call us all sorts of names. They call us freaks because they're afraid of us.
You said that if the Second Amendment was repealed, it would not change the Constitution. I understand that, but I think that the Second Amendment is what gives teeth to the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments.
Yes.
That's what makes the Constitution.
Yeah. Let me clarify. My point is that if you repeal the amendment, it doesn't change anything because the federal government has no power to take to affect our arms in any way. But aren't we grateful that our founders did list our rights, did write the Bill of Rights, and did pass it for us? Because it does give teeth, exactly what he said, to our rights to self-preservation. Am I running out of time? Okay, let me finish up. A couple more quotes, and we'll be done. "Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed." That's Noah Webster. He was one of our founders. He was one of the ones that was involved in writing the Section 8 of Article 1 in the Constitution. And of course, he's the Noah Webster of Webster's Dictionary. George Washington, "A free people ought to be armed. No man shall scruple or hesitate a moment to use arms in defense." And last couple of quotes here. John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said, "Every member of the state," that's referring to us, "ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free." Teach them how to get back to that pinnacle of freedom that I drew out. "By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they are violated and thus be better prepared to defend and assert them." And isn't that what's happening today? People don't know we're losing our rights. People don't know we're losing our freedom. Okay? That's what's happening. They don't understand that our freedoms are quickly evaporating. And last couple of thoughts here. James Garfield, one of the presidents after the Civil War, late 1800s, he said, "Now," and he was a pastor, by the way, before he became president, "Now more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. It is our responsibility what the character of Congress is. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance recklessness, and corruption. In other words, it's our fault, folks. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities to represent them in the national legislature. If the next centennial, and again, he's about 1870 something, so he's talking the next centennial, so after 1970. If the next centennial does not find us a great nation, it will be because those who represent the enterprise, business people, the culture, and the morality of the nation, our pastors, our churches, do not aid in controlling the political forces. How many pastors do you know that are standing up and speaking out?
Zero.
We need more of them. It's not zero. It's not zero, but there's not enough of them. And that's the end. So, folks, I appreciate you letting me hear tonight.